In this episode,
Don't shoot me for this. I was told to buy a Tesla Powerwall before Elon became a dick.
I'm going to be like devil's advocate on this one, right?
I went for a heat pump first.
Biggest mistake is getting the wrong installer.
Greece is not quite the same as the UK.
It's just worth pointing out, we've all spoken around it, but nobody's out and out said it.
The nature of solar is that it's performing at its best at a time when you're probably using your heat pump the least.
You know, the buyer's mindset is, well, I'm paying 550k for a house. I expect the panels to come for free.
welcome to another episode of Homeowners Q&A. I'm your host Mars, and today we're tackling a hot topic: how to integrate a heat pump with solar panels and battery storage, and how to set them up for maximum heating and energy savings. We're joined by a brilliant panel of experts. We've got Max Waddingham and Nathan Ritson from Good Energy, Laurence Bradbury from Auream Energy, and Hendra, best-selling author and heat pump expert. Welcome, everybody. But before we get stuck in, we'd like to say a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Good Energy. Good Energy is the ideal choice for making your whole home greener. As well as providing renewable energy tariffs, the expert team install bespoke heat pump, solar panel, and battery storage solutions that integrate seamlessly to save you money and carbon. Here are just a few reasons to choose Good Energy for your next upgrade. Good Energy is the only B Corp home energy supplier in the UK, providing genuinely renewable power from over 2,500 renewable generators. Rated 5 stars on Trustpilot and Which, you'll get a great customer experience, and Good Energy only installs premium hardware that's built to last and that's backed by long-term warranties. And there are no third parties, just directly employed, highly qualified and accredited teams that treat your home with respect. Find out more at goodenergy.co.uk. Right, Max, so get us going today. We are talking about solar, we're talking about batteries, and we're talking about heat pumps. I've heard it's referred to as the Holy Trinity at the moment when it comes to renewables. In terms of the three technologies that we've got, does it make a difference with regards to which one you install first?
Depends on your objectives. Differences, are you going to offset the electricity you're using or increase that electrical load through a heat pump or something like that if you're replacing a gas boiler? In terms of what you would do first, I mean, it's down to personal preference. There's a lot of benefits from either. Your heat is one of the biggest draws from your property in terms of energy. You could reduce that through an efficient heating system like a heat pump. That said, if you want to understand your energy usage a bit more, solar is probably the way to go because of the really good monitoring systems that come with the solar installations. And then you can kind of see what your consumption figures are, what your patterns are, and see how a heat pump might fit into that. And then there's also the EV charger element as well, probably the cheaper, easier installation. But I think the other thing to consider as well is how disruptive is the installation. If you're dipping your toes into renewables for the first time, you're talking about potentially ripping your house apart over a long period and replacing radiators, pipes, putting a heating system in. Solar could be in and out in a day. Of course, Nathan will know more about that than I do, but relatively low kind of impact onto your kind of day-to-day kind of living. It just kind of feeds into your energy consumption. So personally, I would probably go for the solar first, all things considered, but I didn't. I went for a heat pump first. And yeah, it's down to what you need in your property. I think at the given time, you could wait till your boiler breaks and replace it then. Or on the flip side of that, your boiler could be broken and then you want a renewable tech first off. Yeah, it's just down to what you want to do. I don't think there's any massive benefits to doing one above the other.
I'm going to be like devil's advocate on this one, right? And actually, I'm going to be almost upsetting my best-selling author friend who came and commissioned my system. Because I personally think that I wouldn't go near heat pumps unless you can get your energy costs under control. And because of that, because of the link between the gas price and the electricity price, i.e. it's about 4 times the gas price, I would say if you're going to do something, then install battery storage first, because I think that's the best return on investment if you're planning to do a heat pump. And I have customers queuing up who have got ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps saying, I'm spending 30 quid a day, and I can probably sell them something for 15,000, which will give them £7 a day of heating cost. So actually, for me, I think it's a fairly defined pathway that get your energy costs under control first, and heat pumps make huge amounts of sense after that, because the marginal cost of installing a heat pump and heating the home, and you're right, Max, my mum, who we've just installed a heat pump for like 2 weeks ago, she was using 13 kilowatts a day. She's using 35 now. So she's essentially tripled her electrical load. But because we've got her on a tariff with Octopus called Cozy, where you can cycle the storage 3 times in 24 hours. So she's paying 12 pence a kilowatt, which that means the heating is less than half the price of gas.
And if somebody doesn't have a heat pump, would you still recommend putting a battery in, Laurence?
To be honest, I mean, you're asking the battery salesman whether or not he should be selling batteries, Mars. But I think batteries for all right now. I mean, we are in the middle of January, and I've never been busier. And I think this month alone, we've sold 25 battery systems, and it's only halfway through the month. I mean, it's going crazy out there.
What about you, Graham? So you've got all three technologies now. Do you think that they do work together perfectly?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd have asked me a year ago, I'd have told you that you don't want to be speaking to Laurence and buying batteries. You don't want solar, total waste of time. All you want is a heat pump, because I made all my money out of heat pumps. But I have been on the periphery of all of these technologies a long time. I'm not a battery or a solar expert. I'm sort of more heat pumps. But my experience has been every heat pump I've had, they've been great. But, if you really do the hard maths, they're about the same cost to run as a gas boiler, because gas is cheap and electricity is expensive. And what Laurence has hit on is dynamite. I have a battery in my house now. I just got my first one, and it allows me exactly what Laurence is saying. I haven't got a huge battery. I have quite a large consumption, so 30, 40 units a day in those cold days we had a few weeks ago. The way my battery was sold to me is all it's doing is allowing me to work my way through the expensive periods. So I charge it up when it's really cheap. So I buy all my electricity at 12p, fill the tank up. That then runs me through the expensive period just in time for me to jump into the next cheap one, and so on. So you don't need 3 or 4 or 5 batteries. In my case, I've got one. So all my batteries allowed me to do is I only pay 12p for electricity. My heat pump is 50% of the run cost it was 6 months ago. It is the cheapest heat pump I've ever had. It is half the cost of a gas boiler. So for me, if you're getting a heat pump and you are fortunate enough to have enough money, get yourself a little battery. Doesn't need to be massive, depends on the size of your heat pump and so on, and get that energy cheap. The advantage of a battery is it's the size of a suitcase. It goes on the wall. It's fairly easy to install, over solar, where a bloke's got to go up a scaffold tower, get on the roof and so on. Solar's lovely. I mean, I'm the wrong guy to ask about solar. Mine was put in October. The sun hasn't been out since October, and I've made about 4 kilowatt hours since then. But I'm told things are going to be better in the summer. And I get that. I understand that. And I put it in at exactly the wrong period. And I know in the summer months, I'm going to be paying nothing. I'm going to be being paid. But I would say if you're having a heat pump and you've got that little bit of extra money, get that battery in as well, and your heat pump is going to be phenomenal. It's one of the reasons why I don't care about efficiency. Who cares? The energy's so cheap. Off I go. It's lovely. So yeah, it's made a massive difference to us having that ability to jump into those low cost periods.
So Nathan, from an installer's perspective, what do homeowners need to consider when it comes to integrating the technologies we've just spoken about? So, the solar, the batteries, what do they need to consider?
In truth, the technologies don't particularly integrate with each other, in that a heat pump isn't relying on the solar to operate and the solar isn't relying on the heat pump to operate. So they are kind of independent systems effectively. But obviously they complement each other, as the guys have already said. I believe that the biggest benefit personally is from your panels, because I think they give you the most immediate return, because they're obviously providing you with free energy. That, in addition with battery storage, like Graham says, one, you can then store any excess energy for use later on, or take advantage of some of those dynamic tariffs. And then both of those sort of things can support the electrical demand of the property as a whole, which, as we've sort of discussed, may go up a touch with the introduction of a heat pump. So I wouldn't suggest they integrate together as such. You haven't got one manufacturer that's producing all of these items that sort of seamlessly merge together, but they do very much obviously complement each other. The nature of solar is that it's performing at its best at a time when you're probably using your heat pump the least, and then in the winter you use the demand on your heat pump is at its highest when perhaps the solar is at its worst. The benefit of the battery comes into play, because that really enables you to take advantage of some of these dynamic tariffs that are available. So you're charging your battery off peak for use when you would otherwise be paying more money. And obviously there are companies out there now that are actually offering tariffs in respect of heat pumps, giving you, a lower cost tariff at different periods throughout the day, to then be able to utilize your heat pump at those lower rates.
It's just worth pointing out, we've all spoken around it, but nobody's out and out said it. A lot of this goes with a tariff to make it work. I mean, I know, Laurence, you mentioned your Octopus Cozy, but if you sign up to the right tariff, you get cheap hours where you can charge a battery, you know, do your hot water through your heat pump or whatever. And with the right supplier, you can then get paid for your solar export as well, which I think a few companies, including Good Energy, offer that. And yeah, you can be in a really good position through the choice of the correct tariff as well. So I think just wanted to point that out. We've all spoken around it, but just to out and out say, being on the right tariff is very important as well.
It's 50%, actually, believe it or not. Choosing the right tariff is at least 50% of the equation.
And what happens if you don't have a smart meter? So we actually were intending to put a smart meter in. We had the guys come out just before Christmas. They said they couldn't get access to the actual meter where it's basically positioned. It was a bit of a nightmare. They went away, so we're never ever going to have a smart meter. So does it then still make sense for batteries?
No. You need a smart meter to get the best tariffs. And actually, whatever you have to do, Mars, get a smart meter fitted, because the amount of difference that one thing makes, it'll halve your energy costs, over halve it.
My parents are in a similar position to you, Mars. They can't have a smart meter for some peculiar reason. I can't remember what it is. So my dad buys his electricity at 24p, 24 hours a day. So what's the point in storing the energy if it's always the same cost? So for him, a battery is a complete disaster. And it makes me chuckle because he lives in a little village where it's all very twee and everything's lovely. And everyone fights about planning permission. So they fought the putting up the 5G mast in the village, and now they can't get the smart meters. And they went, that, my friend, is the punishment for being an idiot.
So Laurence, in terms of scheduling, how easy is it to schedule your batteries to actually work with the tariffs that you've selected?
Actually, it's dead easy. You've got two types of tariffs, really. You've got your typical time of use tariffs, where you have defined periods where energy is cheaper, and then you've got your dynamic tariffs, where, like, the one that particularly springs to mind is Agile from Octopus, where you actually get 48 30-minute time slots in a 24-hour period. But, you know, it's all automated using computers, man. The time of use tariffs, you program yourself. You just tell, you know, Cozy, for example, between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. it's 12 pence. So you get the 24-hour clock and in 30-minute increments, and you can just program it accordingly. But just to sort of circle back a little bit, like Nathan was saying, that there is no integration, but the integration between these systems is definitely coming. You know, there's smart grids, and I think there's a company called Homely that's doing some interesting things. But also, forgetting any integration, there are some correlations which you wouldn't think. So I was always skeptical about heat pumps, and Graham will know that because he was the person that sold me mine, for his sins, and it's still working now, Graham, by the way, which is great. But the funny thing is, I mean, January's been outstanding for solar. We've had some amazing days, right? When it's bloody freezing outside, there's no clouds, so the sun shines and the heat pump's working harder. So there is some correlation. But yes, I agree, Nathan. It would be much better if we could be running our heat pumps in the summer when the sun's shining all day long.
I think from an integration point of view, I was sort of suggesting there's no one app kind of thing that controls it all, because you have got sort of potentially you bring together different manufacturers, I guess.
It's a hobbyist's and a geek enthusiast world at the moment. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking people using Google Home Assistant. Your typical heat pump buyer isn't going to go to that extent, but it won't be long until heat pumps and energy prices and everything are all controlled by one of a number of different systems that do it.
Some of the batteries now are very, very clever systems, run with very clever algorithms. And it really is as simple actually as putting your tariff data, you know, into the settings, and then you've got a system that's going to self-analyze. It's going to monitor and kind of self-learn what your usage is. It's going to be predicting potential generation ahead of time, and then it's going to start making financial decisions whether to discharge at certain times of the day to maximize those savings going forwards. As an example, it might not fully charge to 100% overnight on your off-peak tariff if it knows you don't need 100% battery capacity tomorrow. You have to kind of learn to trust them a little bit. Sometimes we find that they might behave in a way that the customer wasn't entirely expecting, but if you trust it, you'll find that they're making some really clever decisions. And we always sort of suggest to customer that if you trust your battery, it's going to get it right more often than you will trying to control it manually.
What would be lovely is if you could go and buy an app from a person and it looks at all of those bits of kit and makes them work brilliantly. And yeah, I work a little bit with a company that does that. So Homely's one. Mine's actually controlled by Hetio. So I have don't shoot me for this. I was told to buy a Tesla Powerwall before Elon became a dick. So I've got a Tesla, and Tesla, it's actually very good software, but it's slightly annoying. So I'll give you an example. A few days ago, I got an email from Octopus saying, if you use lots of energy on Sunday morning between 7 and 8 a.m., we'll give you £1 a kilowatt hour. And I'm like, happy days, I'm going to chuck it all in my battery, get the heat pump on, charge the car, the whole lot. And actually, because my Tesla doesn't know, it didn't get that email, it fought me, the bloody thing, and then it wouldn't take any juice out of the grid. So one of the things that Hetio now do for me is those emails go to Hetio, and they actually tell my Powerwall to dump all its energy overnight and then charge in that period. So it doesn't happen very often. I'm sure you guys do the same thing. You get maybe once every couple of weeks, you get a funny little email saying, if you could reduce your demand at this time, it'd be handy, or if you could increase your demand at this time and level the grid. And the incentives are big, like really big. So it's a bit of a game. You think, I can get a free bottle of wine out of this if I manage this quite well. I'm not the guy who wants to pull the levers that much. I have a look at it occasionally. When I first got my system, I logged in every day. I'm looking at what's going on. And as you say, it's quite boring after a while because the blooming thing does such a good job. You just go, oh, you do it. No, I can't be bothered.
You'd need some sort of cooperation from the manufacturers for that, though, presumably. And I wonder if they'd be quite so willing, because obviously the manufacturers put a lot of investment into their own, platforms and monitoring. I just wonder how keen they would be to share that out to get it on some sort of unified platform, I guess. Be interesting though. Hopefully it will be coming along soon.
Some of the companies have been told to do it say some of the companies, there is a framework with the Smart Grid Ready, but the functionality of that Smart Grid Ready system, I mean, for the heat pump that I have, for example, the Smart Grid Ready is just awful. It's on, it's off. That's it. There's no, okay, well, I'm going to have this excess power in an hour for 30 minutes or something, so let's bring the heat pump on, but let's ramp it down. It's none of that. It's like on, off, and it would literally be a cloud would pass over the solar panels, and then the off signal goes to the heat pump that's just started its 8-minute startup cycle, and then it's going off again.
Do you know, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the things. I've got a car charger that charges from sunlight, and that was exactly what happened when I first plugged it in. It was charging great, and then it stopped because the clouds came over, and then it's got a 15-minute back off timer, so then it waits 15 minutes while the sun's shining before it starts. And I was just like, oh my god, I'm wasting all this energy.
So we need to get over those hurdles, and then the app is not far away.
Those things come from the market they're built for. So when you kind of look at them and go, that's madness. In the UK, the system you've just described is a bloody disaster because we have clouds. And you go, yeah, well, the bloke who wrote that lives in Greece. You go, well, great. I'm sure it's brilliant in Greece, but it doesn't work here. And manufacturers are beginning to work out that Greece is not quite the same as the UK or Scandinavia. So historically, especially in heat pumps, it's been Scandinavian market, Southern Europe, and the rest of it, good luck. And suddenly they've decided there's a band in the middle now that's not quite the same as the other two. So I think you're going to see a few things, which will hopefully sort that out and make it a little bit of a less blunt tool. And this demon app, which doesn't exist yet, should be looking at the weather data going, it's going to be really sunny in 2 hours time. So what are we going to do with the heat pump? Let's get a hot water cycle in. Let's do the Legionella and all that kind of stuff. And right now they're getting there. I mean, it's an exciting time if you are in Homely and Hetio and all those other brands, because the big manufacturers will start snapping that up. And you're right, Nathan. I think, if you're Samsung, you go, I don't want to share that with Mitsubishi and so on. A lot of the manufacturers are kind of trying to do everything in one box. But there has to be some integration because, let's be honest, none of the renewable companies that we work for are like Apple. Once you touch an Apple device, you can't buy anything else. It's not quite like that in our sector.
Planning to install an air source heat pump? Then get your copy of Bodge Buster. It's packed with must-ask questions, real homeowner insights, and a practical guide for a smoother installation. Available in print and on Kindle. Link in the description. Nathan, if somebody's watching this and they're looking at getting PV put in, they're thinking about a heat pump, maybe an EV charger, maybe a battery, what is the deal with permissions and planning? Because I know that when we wanted to put our panels in, I think we had to wait up to 6 months for Scottish Power, who's our DNO, to actually give us the approvals for that. Is that a massive hurdle that people need to build into their lead times when it comes to putting in a whole bunch of these different technologies? And is their grid going to be capable of supporting them to, handle all of these different things?
It depends obviously which technologies you're having. When it comes to a solar installation and batteries, particularly if the battery has got the ability to export to the grid, then we are looking to seek DNO approval for that if your system is above a certain size. Typically nowadays with a panels on the roof and a battery, you are going to exceed that limit. So we would look to always seek DNO approval prior to install. That process typically takes 45 working days. So you're looking at sort of a 9-week period, so we do have to factor that in. So if somebody is interested in a future install, then obviously we'd always recommend getting that in as soon as possible, because once we've got that approval, we know what they can have, what they're allowed to have, and we can start having sensible conversations about costs and install methods, that sort of thing. Obviously where Max is fitting heat pumps, and also it's true with electric vehicle chargers, then we do have to very much consider the maximum demand on the property. So obviously if you're charging a battery overnight, running a heat pump, charging a car overnight, then that electrical demand is going to be somewhat increased, and we've got to make sure we don't exceed the supply capacity that the property has, and we have to make sure that that stays within safe boundaries, so to speak. So we definitely need to look at those, look at the design, and run the numbers and do some calculations to make sure we stay within that. But what we've got within most of the technologies is the ability to what we call load limit. So if you have, for example, 10 kilowatts of solar on your roof, but the DNO said, yes, you can have your 10 kilowatts, but actually you must limit the export to the grid to, say, 4 kilowatts, then within our technology, we're able to set the system up to ensure that it will never export more than is allowed. With EV chargers, for example, we can set grid limits again. So again, if you were to plug your car in and charging your car at a full charge rate, in addition to what else was going in the house was going to exceed your capacity, then the car charger effectively would ramp down to stay within those acceptable limits. And then obviously the same is true for Max and his heat pump installations. They need to consider the maximum demands of the property so that to ensure when the heat pump's running at full chat, again, we're not exceeding what that sort of supply capacity is. But for a full installation, if we've got a car plugged in and your heat pump kicks in, then what's going to happen actually is that it will be your car charger that ramps down, or your battery might cease grid charging for the period that we are exceeding those limits. So the technology is in place to make sure we stay within those safe sort of boundaries, if you like, and that we don't ever exceed, like I say, that supply capacity to a house.
So, Max, the one thing that I found really interesting is that when we had our solar PV put in 6 years ago and our heat pump, the guys actually came through and said, well, you need to put a solar diverter on to do your hot water. And we ran that for years, and we're really happy with it. And I had one of these kind of light bulb moments thinking, well, hang on, I'm exporting the electricity into the immersion tank, which is basically charging 1 kilowatt hours of electricity is heating 1 kilowatt hours of water. And I figured, well, if the heat pump comes on, obviously the efficiencies kick in, and the solar that's still driving that is now actually ultimately making me more money. Not that a solar diverter is the same price as a battery, but are solar diverters, if somebody has got a heat pump, actually that necessary?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a discussion Nathan and I had, I think, the other day actually about these, and it's a very good way to quickly dump energy into your hot water cylinder if you need to. So the example we just spoke about, clouds go over, you don't want to start your heat pump for 6 minutes, then it goes off, and then it comes on for another couple of minutes. You could do that quite comfortably through a solar diverter. Now, me personally, I'm on a tariff which pays me for export. Good energy, 15 pence a kilowatt hour. And overnight, I buy my electric in at 7 pence a kilowatt hour. So I won't use one, thank you very much. I'll just do my hot water through my heat pump overnight and pay the cheaper rates because I know it's going to do that. I'd rather sell that kilowatt hour to the grid because I make more than it would cost me at night. Now, that said, if you're not on that particular setup or that tariff, it is free energy that you can dump into an energy store, your hot water cylinder. Hopefully, your installer should be able to guide you as to what the best route for you would be.
I think the hot water controllers, the diverters, they're a fairly low value item. And I think the return on investment from a hot water controller over a period of time is very good. You know, when you're utilising that sort of excess energy. I've got one at home, for example. It appears on the same app as my solar battery and some of my heating, which is really great to have it all in one place for controllability. But the reality is I've got a house with children in, use quite a lot of hot water every day. You know, it probably takes 2 hours to heat my tank. You know, it's a three kilowatt element in it. So you're talking 6 kilowatt hours. If I can do that on a nice sunny day, it's quite a lot of energy saved. You know, obviously Max's point about the tariffs, which has changed the landscape slightly in the way you use some of these products, including batteries. But I think the return for what is relatively a low value item over a period of time, personally for me, I think they're good value for money. In the summer, I would argue I'm probably saving best part of £2 a day heating my hot water tank. You know, so you run the numbers on that, I think they pay for themselves quite quickly.
That's a really good point as well, Nathan, because I'm speaking for the kids being at school at the moment. You know, we heat the hot water tank up at night, and then that'll kind of do us through the day until the next evening. But yeah, absolutely. And those days where you drain that overnight, or, you know, my wife from Arizona takes a 5,000 degree shower for 5 hours, and you can charge your cylinder from the sun free of charge. You would need to recharge that cylinder anyway, and you're going to be paying from the grid. Those scenarios are fantastic.
So Graham, you put the PV up. What was your kind of thought process behind how many panels you actually ended up installing?
That was quite an interesting one. So because I'm a mega geek when it comes to energy, so I have an Excel that tells me every kilowatt hour I've consumed since 2009. So I had all that data, but manually done and so on. So I looked at it and went, I don't, because I'm a bit of a rebel, so I don't want to buy a load of panels, make a load of electricity and give it back to the man. I deal with Optimise Energy. I'm sure they're just as evil as you guys. But I make this electricity, which I paid for the power station. I stick it into the grid, and then you bastards sell it back to me at 28p a unit 3 hours later. One of the reasons when I looked at it, I went, I don't want to go too big because I don't want to make loads of energy, which I'm just giving to Optimus to flog to someone else. So I looked at it, from my mental view of this was, I'm going to get the panels just big enough to cover what I need to do, and that will do. But what my solar installer said to me was, the scaffolding's the same price if you have one panel or 50. And the guys are on the roof, and panels are cheap. The expensive bit is the labour, the getting up there and wiring the bloody thing up. So in the end, they put as many panels as they could get on the roof, and I ended up with 20 panels, I think, which is something like 7 or 8 kilowatts, which now I think about it, now I have the experience, and this is from someone who doesn't sell solar or know anything about it. That 8 kilowatt system is only 8 kilowatts on a lovely sunny day in July. In January, I'm making a bit. I'm get those panels are making me a little bit more energy. If I only had one panel, which is all I needed, maybe I'd get bugger all in January. So you've got to get over yourself a bit and go, the guys are going on the roof, get as much up there as you can. If you really don't want to give it to the man, and this is what my dad is like. My dad's 87. He's not allowed solar because he lives in this place where there's planning permissions. He's got one panel on a bin in the back garden. And my dad actually turns the lights on if he gets in danger of the point of getting to exporting, because he'd rather burn the energy than give it to the evil who is the energy company, which I deeply admire his commitment.
We've got solar panels, and we ended up putting 22 panels up. We basically maxed out our south-facing roof. And the biggest regret that we've had was not putting more panels on the west-facing roof, because we get an awful lot of sunlight as we approach sunset. The initial thought process, which was very stupid at the time, was, well, it's a different roof, so we'll just get new scaffolding put up and we'll put more panels up. But what impacted that was that then you have to get inverters, you've got to get all kinds of new kit, which you've already paid for before. Nathan, is it good advice to just say, look, if you're going to pull the trigger on solar, max out as much of your roof as possible, because panels, as Graham said, are dirt cheap. You're only paying for the labor. So, putting up an extra 10 or 15 panels isn't really going to cost you that much more in the greater scheme of things.
Absolutely. I mean, my advice to a customer, because we often get asked, we've discussed the system, we've gone to site to do a sort of a technical survey for the customer, and we get that question all of the time. And absolutely, my recommendation would be to have as many panels as you can physically fit and as you can afford, because you might as well do it properly once. And also, you've got to consider that, again, good old British weather. It means that as Graham alluded to, in the summer you might be generating more than you need, in which case you might be able to export some and hopefully get paid for that, depending on who your supplier is. But obviously in the winter, if a system's running at 50% or 30%, then obviously the generation is going to drop considerably. So if you've got as many panels as you can fit, physically fit on the roof, then it means you're getting the most you possibly can in the winter to cover your electrical sort of needs. And albeit you might end up overproducing in the summer, but nowadays, like I say, you can put it into a battery, you can heat your hot water, it can contribute to your heat pump, and you can export it and take advantage of some of the export tariffs that are available. So absolutely, just like I say, keeping within the confines of space on the roof and budget, really. Absolutely, it makes perfect sense to me to maximise where you can.
Do you need help understanding your heat pump? Then pick up a copy of From Zero to Heat Pump Hero, an essential guide offering practical advice and basic instructions for new heat pump owners to maximize system efficiency. Available in print and on Kindle, link in the description. So Laurence, let's talk brands. So in terms of batteries, if somebody's watching this and they're thinking about putting a battery in for their property to either supplement their heat pump or to avail of the better time of use tariffs, which brands do you think that people should be considering?
If you look at USwitch, they will tell you that your average 3-bedroom semi uses 2.9 megawatt hours of electricity per annum. And actually, the Powerwall is probably too large for that requirement of energy use. So I think first and foremost, you really need to gauge the battery with regard to how much consumption you have. And actually, the size of the battery in terms of kilowatt hours largely dictates the price as well. You can specify a large battery if you want to, but you're not going to get the most out of it and your payback will be a long, long time. I think the operating system on the Powerwall, as Graham alluded to earlier, let's look at the bottom end of the market, right? You can buy cheap batteries. If you want cheap batteries, you can buy them. But all they're going to do is charge up and discharge, and that's the end of it, right? Simple as. When we come into autumn and spring, and especially if you're running a heat pump, because when you've got a heat pump, your electricity use is elevated. So the ability to actually forecast how much solar generation you'll have on a day, and I think this is something that probably Nathan alluded to a little bit earlier, that if we know that it's going to be a great solar day, we might not bother filling up the battery to 100% and then exporting the solar. Now, all of that is really controlled by the price signals. So as Max said, those of us in the know are buying energy at 7 pence and selling it at 15 pence. So regardless, you want the battery to charge overnight at 7 pence because you can give it back to the grid at over twice that amount. And utilizing those economics really, really works. I could give you a report that says of the 35.5 megawatts that I've used in the last 12 months, I've paid 7.24 pence a kilowatt for energy taken off the grid. I mean, it's that good.
As a consumer, I'm not in our installation area, so I've gone for, I can't remember what it is now. The solar I had installed probably about a year ago, I think they put in a grow watt, which is, we're talking middle aisle, little kind of inverter and battery here. It does what it says on the tin. It's like Laurence said, it charges, it discharges. I tell it what times to do that in. That'll do for me, but that's because, again, as we've said a few times, I'm in that kind of geeky circle that will make these twitches myself, and I'll program my heat pump and my consumption around what the battery can do. But I wouldn't say it's the brand I would encourage customers to use if they want kind of automated consumption. It's hard work changing the timings on the battery. It's hard work logging in and seeing your consumption. The app is non-existent or terrible when you get on it. So that's the one I would say probably not to use. But when it comes to what we install, Nathan's your expert there.
We exclusively offer the Tesla Powerwall and the Solar Edge batteries. They are at the higher end on the market, but we do it quite deliberately. One, because our typical customer has often done a lot of research themselves, and obviously they're coming to us actually requesting those stronger brands. And secondly, we think that the most important thing for any of our customers is reliability, and the Tesla and the Solar Edge products offer that reliability. They offer fantastic warranties, and they offer really good sort of post-install support, both for us and for the customer. And we personally just think that that's worth, paying those slightly premium prices over the cheaper batteries. As an installer, we don't want to be returning to customers, time and time again, trying to fix this and trying to fix that. And that ultimately just undermines the customer's confidence. So we think the reliability is worth the extra pounds ultimately.
So if you invest in Solar Edge, do they have a joint inverter that basically allows the PV and the batteries to communicate without buying additional kit?
Yes, absolutely, they do. So Solar Edge are one of the manufacturers that are trying to create that sort of whole ecosystem. So with a Solar Edge, you can have an inverter that obviously will look after the generation coming down from the roof. That will also that couples also with the DC battery, so it converts the DC energy, whether it's from the roof or the battery, into AC energy that's then usable by the house. They've also introduced recently a backup function, so you have another bit of equipment that can control the backup function, so in the event of a power cut, that you can still supply power to the house. And they've also got additional products by way of their own hot water controller. They also have their own EV charger, and they also do offer smart sockets as well, so you can control other appliances around the house. So that's what I have at home personally, actually, and I've got it all in that one ecosystem, all on the one app. And I think they're the manufacturer that's probably come closest to creating that entire ecosystem, if that makes sense. So yeah, it does work very, very well. That said, I think we probably install more Tesla Powerwalls than we do Solar Edge batteries. Again, just because the brand is so strong, everybody's heard of it. Everyone's looked at Facebook posts and watched YouTube videos or has a friend who's got one. So, the strength of the brand for Tesla means that they're often coming to us actually for a Powerwall, quite specifically.
So, Laurence, I mean, we've pretty much all between us invested quite a lot of money in terms of tech into our respective properties. Does that investment necessarily translate into the actual asking price if you were to sell your property at a later stage? Do you think that you can recoup some of that if you've only put it in and you've only been on the property for, let's say, 2 or 3 years? Do you think that investment, you can get it back?
Do you know what? This is a really interesting topic, because I for years I've had discussions with estate agents who've said, "Oh no, like the customers view it as a negative." But then since energy prices went crazy, it's now a net positive. So and also bear in mind that batteries don't have to. Solar is something that you're probably not going to bother moving because of the fixed costs. But battery, I mean, I've got one customer, we've moved a battery for him 3 times. Every time he upgrades his house, we take the battery. So it's a 10-year warranted product. We installed it in 2018. It's 2025. We installed it again yesterday. I think most estate agents now will say a house that comes with 0 bills or very close to 0 bills should have a significant premium over one that doesn't. But the buyer's mindset is, well, I'm paying 550k for a house, I expect the panels to come for free.
It's an interesting point, actually. A friend of mine's an estate agent, and I asked her this question a while back. Her kind of thoughts on it were, you might not necessarily make the money back, but if it's your house and somebody else's house and they're considering buying one of them, it's a sweetener for your house, so it's not necessarily going to add value, but it will make it easier to sell.
Well, I tried to sell my house with an appalling heat pump in it, and to be honest, the house was appalling, so I had a lot of trouble selling it. But I did have the big question from everyone who viewed it was, this heat pump, does it work? We were selling in autumn, so we just wound it up, and everyone came in and said, does it have to be this hot? and it was deliberate, and it worked. They were like, oh, okay, I was a bit worried about it, but actually it's boiling in there. How do you turn it down? I said, turn the thermostat down. I went, okay. I'm with these guys. I mean, you go, it's no different from a kitchen. You go into the kitchen, it's got beautiful appliances all made by Miele, and you go, God, that's lovely, I'll buy that house. If it's got all the load of old crap in there, you think I'm going to have to replace it all. So solar and a battery is probably the same. You go, great, it's got solar. Wouldn't have bought it myself, but going to leave it on the roof, get a load of free energy. Why not?
What are the most common mistakes that homeowners make when integrating all the technologies we spoke about today into their properties, and how can they avoid making them?
Biggest mistake is getting the wrong installer, because you need to go to a company that you can trust is going to offer you good advice, do a good install, and offer you the the most appropriate equipment and a system design that's actually going to suit your needs. So that's the first mistake that they might make. The only probably one common mistake we see is people getting the tariff data wrong when they're trying to input it into batteries, which isn't difficult to do, but I think it's easy to get slightly wrong. And then if you get the tariff data wrong, the battery behaves incorrectly, because you can actually manipulate battery behavior by manipulating the data, which we don't recommend, but you can. So sometimes that's a little mistake that we see. If somebody's trying to be clever and manipulate the functions of the battery, or they just inadvertently put the data in incorrectly, then that causes some issues, which is fun and games for us to help sort out.
Have you got questions about heat pumps and renewables? Then head over to the forums at Renewable Heating Hub for practical advice from thousands of fellow homeowners and heat pump users. So that wraps up another fantastic episode of Homeowners Q&A, and a huge thank you to our guests today, Max, Nathan, Graham and Lawrence, for sharing their insights on integrating heat pumps, solar panels and battery storage. And of course, a big thank you to Good Energy, our sponsor for today's episode, for supporting this important conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and as always, stay warm, stay green, stay tuned. Goodbye.